Three Lanterns at Dusk, A Guild of Assassins story by John Cronshaw. Smoke hung in grey layers beneath the tavern's low ceiling, trapping the mingled scents of ale, sweat, and wet wool. Soren sat alone in the corner, his back to the wall, a half-empty mug cooling between his palms. 3 hours he'd waited, watching patrons come and go, memorizing faces out of habit rather than necessity. When the envelope arrived, it came with his fourth ale, slipped beneath the tankard by a serving girl who never met his eyes. Soren broke the seal and extracted the single folded page within. Most contracts came with details, names, locations, preferred methods. This one held only a hand-drawn symbol, 3 lanterns suspended over flowing water, beneath it 4 words in precise script. Dusk, one must die. He refolded the page and tucked it into an inner pocket, his expression unchanged despite the unusual brevity. The guild's contracts were typically specific, leaving no room for interpretation or error. This vagueness felt deliberate. A test, perhaps. Soren drained his ale and left coins on the scarred table, more than enough to cover his tab and ensure nobody remembered his face. Outside, night had fallen, the narrow street gleaming with recent rain. He moved through shadows until he reached the alley behind the inn, where a familiar form perched on a rain barrel. Dinarin's scales glimmered faintly in the darkness, her eyes fixed on him as he approached. She'd been his handler for 5 years now, the liaison between Soren and guild command. Never friendly, rarely forthcoming, but reliable in her cold efficiency. Why so vague? Dinarin's head tilted. The guild knows. You don't need to. I need something. A name, at least. The symbol is enough. 3 lanterns, river crossing in the eastern foothills. At dusk, one dies, the unlit one. Soren's jaw tightened. That's not standard procedure. Your procedure is to obey, Dinarin said, wings shifting against her back. The guild is satisfied with your recent work. Don't complicate matters.
With that, she launched into the night, a shadow merging with deeper darkness.
Soren remained in the alley, rainwater soaking through his boots as he considered the strange assignment. Vague contracts often indicated internal guild matters, cleaning house, as senior members euphemistically called it. Such jobs carried additional complications. By morning, he was headed east. The main road soon gave way to narrower paths, winding through increasingly rugged terrain. He followed the river that locals called Widow's Tears, its waters swift with spring melt from the highlands. Villages grew smaller and farther between, each one more insular than the last. It took half a day to reach his destination. The river crossing came into view through swirling banks of fog, a narrow stone bridge spanning turbulent waters. A small gatehouse stood sentinel at its western approach, weathered timber overlaid with slate to withstand the region's frequent rains, and strung between 3 tall posts hung the lanterns from the contract. Simple iron constructions, perfectly identical, positioned to guide travelers through the notorious highland mists. Soren found a sheltered vantage point among rocky outcrops overlooking the crossing. He settled in to observe, cataloguing details. The gatehouse showed signs of regular maintenance, no broken windows, chimney in good repair, firewood stacked along one wall. A small garden plot provided vegetables. Whoever maintained this isolated post took pride in their work. Movement drew his attention as a figure emerged from the gatehouse, then a second and a third. Even from this distance, their matching appearance was evident. 3 men of identical height and build, dressed in the same grey uniforms. They moved with coordinated efficiency, checking the bridge's stonework and adjusting the lantern's hanging chains. Soren committed their patterns to memory, noting patrol routes and timing. The fog thickened as afternoon waned, swallowing the landscape in rolling white. By the time he descended towards the crossing, only the gatehouse and its immediate surroundings remained visible. He approached the gatehouse with the careful hesitation of a weary traveller, his clothes deliberately muddied, his expression schooled to show fatigue and mild distress. The role came easily after years of similar performances. "Hello, the house," he called, keeping a respectable distance from the door. "Traveller seeking shelter." The door opened promptly, revealing one of the identical men he'd observed earlier. Up close, the man's features came into sharper focus. Mid-50s, perhaps, weathered skin marked by decades of outdoor duty, grey hair cropped close to the scalp. His uniform bore no insignia, but its cut suggested military heritage. "Welcome, stranger," the man said, his voice carrying the distinctive accent of the northern provinces. "What brings you to our crossing?" "Misfortune. Lost my cart in the mud about 3 miles back. Horse broke free and bolted. I've been following the river since midday, hoping to find shelter before nightfall." The man nodded. "You're welcome to wait out the fog here. The crossing sees little traffic these days, but we maintain it nonetheless." He stepped aside, gesturing Soren into the gatehouse's main room. Inside, the other 2 men looked up from a table where they appeared to be sharing a modest dinner. The similarity between the 3 was uncanny. Not merely brothers, but identical triplets. "I'm Tom," said the one who'd answered the door. "These are my brothers, Jorund and Hal." The other 2 nodded in perfect unison, their expressions matching so exactly that Soren found it difficult to determine which was which. All 3 had the same grey eyes, the same network of fine lines around their mouths, the same slight forward slope to their shoulders. "Brant," Soren dipped his head. "I appreciate the hospitality." "Join us," said one of the seated brothers, either Jorund or Hal. "We have stew to spare." The third brother was already retrieving a bowl from a shelf, his movements a perfect echo of the others. One ladled stew while another sliced bread. The third poured ale, all without verbal communication. Soren accepted the meal with thanks, settling onto the bench opposite his hosts. The stew was simple but hearty, root vegetables and rabbit, well seasoned with mountain herbs. "Not many travellers this time of year," said one of the brothers. "Especially with the fog so thick," another said without pause. "Though the logging crews will come through soon enough," the third said, as if they were a single entity sharing thoughts across separate bodies. Soren watched them carefully as they ate, searching for distinguishing characteristics. The one who'd introduced himself as Tom had a habit of tapping his spoon against his bowl before each bite, a small ritual repeated with precise consistency. Another, perhaps Jorund, laughed with a slight wheeze when Soren mentioned the difficulty of mountain travel. The third remained largely silent, but stared too long whenever Soren looked away, gaze heavy and evaluating. Their conversation flowed with unnatural smoothness, sentences begun by one brother and completed by another without hesitation. They asked polite questions about Soren's fictional journey, but deflected inquiries about themselves. "You've maintained this crossing for some time," Soren said, keeping his tone casual. 23 years, they answered in unison, then exchanged glances that might have been amusement. "And before that?" A moment of silence stretched between them. "Logistics," said one, "but those days are behind us." "We prefer the quiet now," said another. "The solitude," said the third. Soren nodded, filing away this confirmation of guild connection. 3 identical brothers, former logistics operatives, now maintaining an isolated crossing where travellers were rare.
The puzzle was taking shape,
but its core remained obscure. As night settled over the highlands, the brothers arranged a sleeping pallet for Soren near the hearth. They took turns at watch, one always awake while the others rested in the gatehouse's small adjoining chamber, each shift exactly 3 hours. Soren feigned sleep, keeping his breathing deep and steady as he listened to their quiet movements. Occasionally they spoke to each other in low tones, but never said anything of consequence. As if they knew they were being observed, as if they had been expecting him. The guild's contract echoed in his mind. Dusk. One must die. But which one? And why? When the brothers' breathing settled into the steady rhythm of sleep, Soren moved. He slipped from his pallet without a sound, bare feet whispering across worn floorboards. The brother on watch, he had lost track of which was which, sat near the window, gaze fixed on the crossing rather than the interior. The gatehouse was simple in its layout. Main room with hearth and table. Small sleeping chamber with 3 narrow cots. a storage area containing supplies, tools, and records for the crossing, every item in its proper place. Soren checked drawers and shelves with the careful precision that had made him one of the guild's most reliable operatives. The brothers' possessions revealed little. Identical sets of clothing, neatly folded, weapons maintained with military attention to detail, personal effects minimal and shared equally among all three. Their logbook documented bridge maintenance and the rare traveller crossing, each entry written in the same precise handwriting regardless of which brother had been on duty. Shifts rotated according to a pattern Soren couldn't immediately discern. Not simple alternation, but something more complex. In a locked drawer beneath the main desk, he found an old guild ledger, its cover worn with age and handling. The pages contained operation records, though most names had been deliberately redacted, black ink obscuring identities and locations. Only dates and outcome designations remained. Successful, compromised, terminated. The final entry, dated 23 years earlier, caught his attention. Unlike the others, it contained a single word written in red: betrayal. Soren replaced the ledger exactly as he'd found it, his mind turning over possibilities. One of the three had betrayed the guild in some fashion. The contract suddenly made more sense. The guild's long memory had finally caught up with these brothers, and one must pay the price. But which one had committed the betrayal, and why maintain this isolated post for 2 decades afterward? More importantly, why had the other two remained with the guilty party, knowing the guild's eventual retribution was certain? He returned to his pallet before the watch changed, arranging himself in the same position he'd occupied earlier. When morning light filtered through the gatehouse windows, he rose as if from a restful sleep, accepting the bowl of porridge offered by one of the brothers with a grateful smile. "The fog should lift by midday," said the brother who always tapped his spoon. "We'd be happy to help you continue your journey then," said the wheezer. "Unless you wish to remain another night," said the starer. "I appreciate the offer," Soren said, studying each face in turn. "But I should press on. I've imposed on your hospitality enough." As they broke their fast, Soren directed the conversation towards their duties. "It seems a lonely post, maintaining this crossing." The brothers exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "Duty requires sacrifice," one said. "And loyalty carries its own price," another said. "But some debts can never be fully paid," the third said, his gaze meeting Soren's. The air in the gatehouse seemed to thicken, the pretense wearing thin between them. Soren reached slowly into his pocket and extracted the folded contract, opening it to reveal the symbol of 3 lanterns over water. He placed it on the table without comment. None of the brothers showed surprise. Not even a flicker of reaction passed across their identical faces. "They always said they'd send someone," said the first. "We just didn't know when." "But only one of us deserves it," said the second. "And none of us will tell you who," said the third. Soren studied them, these strange mirror images whose identities had blurred into a single entity over decades of isolation. Why make it so difficult? If you know why I'm here, why not simply present the guilty party? The brothers smiled in unison, an expression both sad and knowing. "Because guilt is rarely simple," they replied in perfect harmony. The day passed with strange formality, all 4 men aware of what would transpire at sunset, yet continuing their routines as if nothing were amiss. The brothers tended to their normal duties, checking the bridge's stonework, maintaining the gatehouse, preparing meals. Soren assisted where invited, all while tracking the sun's gradual descent towards the western hills. By mid-afternoon, the fog began to lift, revealing the rugged beauty of the highlands stretching in all directions. The river churned below the crossing, swollen with spring melt, its constant roar a backdrop to the day's quiet activities. "A caravan might attempt the crossing this evening," Soren said as the brothers prepared their evening meal. "Perhaps we should ensure the lanterns are ready." The brothers nodded in unison, accepting the thin pretext without comment. As the sun lowered towards the horizon, they moved outside to tend to the iron lanterns strung between their tall posts. Soren followed, positioning himself where he could observe all three simultaneously. "These lanterns have guided travelers for generations," said one brother, checking the oil level in the first lamp. "Even in the thickest fog, their light cuts through," said another, adjusting the second lamp's chain. "Though sometimes one must remain dark," said the third, standing before the final lantern without touching it. Soren watched them, the Ravenglass dagger a cold presence against his spine. The sun touched the distant peaks, setting them ablaze with golden light. Shadows lengthened, and the evening fog began its creeping advance up from the river. Dusk approached, the moment of decision drawing near. With synchronized movements, two of the brothers struck flint to steel, igniting their lanterns. Golden light bloomed within iron casings, pushing back against the gathering gloom. The third lantern remained unlit, its bearer standing motionless before it. The contract's instructions crystallized into certainty. Soren reached back, drawing the Ravenglass dagger from its sheath. The blade hummed with anticipation. He produced the vial of blood from his inner pocket, uncorking it with practiced ease. A single drop fell upon the dagger's edge. The blade began to glow with internal fire, illuminating the gathering mist with ethereal radiance. Soren stepped forward, decision made. The brother before the unlit lantern turned at Soren's approach. Without a word, he knelt in the damp earth, head bowed, hands resting open on his thighs, the perfect posture of one who had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind. "Are you sure?" called one of the others, his lantern casting long shadows across the ground. The kneeling man didn't turn. "We all agreed." Soren stood before him, Ravenglass dagger glowing between them. The contract's simplicity had disguised a deeper complexity, one that now gave him pause despite years of unquestioning service. "Why protect him?" Soren asked, gaze shifting between the three brothers. "Because he was the one who confessed," said one of the brothers by the lit lanterns. "He wanted the guild to find us." "And one of us had to die," said the other, his face half hidden in shadow. Soren looked down at the kneeling figure, seeing for the first time the subtle differences that distinguished him from his brothers. A scar at his temple, usually hidden by identical haircuts. Hands more calloused on the right than the left. Eyes that held a certain peace despite the moment's gravity. The Ravenglass dagger pulsed in Soren's grip, eager to fulfill its purpose. He had never questioned a contract before, had never hesitated when the moment of execution arrived. The guild's will was his will, their judgment beyond question. Yet something in this strange tableau gave him pause. Three identical men who had shared one life, one identity for decades, who had agreed among themselves that one would pay the price for a betrayal that perhaps all had committed, or perhaps none. The moment stretched, fog swirling around their ankles, the river's constant voice drowning out all other sound. Then Soren moved, decision made. The Ravenglass dagger plunged forward, finding the kneeling brother's heart. The man made no sound as the blade entered his chest, his expression almost relieved as life fled from his eyes. Fire erupted from the wound, racing through the body from within. The Ravenglass blade drank deeply, pulling life and memory into itself in a rush of flame. The body slumped to the ground, empty now of whatever had animated it. No blood spilled onto the damp earth, no scream echoed across the crossing. Just the soft crackle of burning bone and the fog swallowing the unnatural glow. Soren withdrew his blade, wiping it clean with a cloth from his pocket. The Ravenglass had returned to its natural state, satisfaction temporarily quelling its constant hunger. The remaining brothers stood motionless beside their lit lanterns, faces cast in golden light. "It is done," Soren said, sheathing his dagger. They nodded in unison, neither grief nor relief visible in their expressions. "The contract is complete." "We understand," they replied together, their voices indistinguishable even now. Soren returned to the gatehouse, the brothers following at a measured distance. Within, he located the guild ledger and carried it to the hearth. Pages curled and blackened as flames consumed the record of whatever betrayal had led to this moment. He conducted a final sweep of the gatehouse, ensuring no other evidence remained. The brothers watched without comment, their faces identical masks of acceptance. When the ledger had been reduced to ash, Soren gathered his few belongings. "I'll be leaving now." The brothers nodded, moving aside to clear his path to the door. "Safe journey," said one. "The fog will lift by morning," the other said.
"You chose right. We think."
The words followed him across the bridge and down the eastern path, a final riddle he had no desire to solve. His contract was complete. One had died, the unlit one as instructed. Whatever game the brothers had played among themselves was their own affair. Fog clung to the lower slopes, transforming familiar terrain into something alien and uncertain. Soren moved through it with confident steps, his senses attuned to the path, even when visibility failed. At the base of the hill, where the river widened and grew calmer, a familiar form waited. Dinarin's scales blended with the grey stones where she perched, her eyes reflecting what little light penetrated the mist. "Which one did you kill?" "The one who didn't light his lantern." Dinarin nodded once. That was the instruction. "And if the wrong one died?" "The guild is satisfied." Her head tilted, studying him with unblinking focus.
"Are you?"
Soren didn't answer immediately. The question itself was unusual. Dinarin rarely concerned herself with his personal satisfaction. She existed to deliver contracts and confirm their completion. Nothing more. "It doesn't matter. The contract is fulfilled."
"Indeed," Dinarin said. "It is." The end. Thanks for listening. To find out more about John Cronshaw's work and claim your free starter library, visit johncronshaw.com. 3 Lanterns at Dusk is copyright 2025 by John Cronshaw.